Hello, you are listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira.
Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas.
Wow, such energy.
Yes.
All right, today we are talking about probably a controversial topic, I think. Like, it's already controversial between me and Thomas, I think. So
It's not really.
We'll just say it's controversial. Anyway, I just came across this interesting article, and you guys know occasionally I'll pull up something that just kind of the concept sounds interesting to me, and I think it's an interesting conversation. But this is an article about marital hatred, and this particular one was in Washington Post, but I've seen similar articles in Newsweek and all different outlets. But there is a therapist named Terrence Real, R-E-A-L, I think it's Real, who also wrote a book. I can't remember the book name right now, but maybe Thomas has it for us. But he wrote, oh, here it is. Us, getting past you and me to build a more loving relationship. And one of the quotes in here is, nobody acknowledges the darkness. So he's talking about, feeling hatred towards your spouse, which I think is a pretty strong term. I know we all have those maybe moments where we feel that way, but I don't think you walk around feeling hatred for days. If you feel hatred for days, you're probably getting a divorce, right? So, but I think that anytime that two people, you have a relationship with anybody, relationships are hard and they can be very challenging. And so, that's kind of where this concept is born out of. Mm-hmm. You experienced marital hatred, did you not, in your first?
Just a few minutes ago, I
did. From me and your last wife, and yeah. Well, I know that for me in my first marriage, there was a lot of. Hi, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Thomas. And today we're going to talk about marital hatred.
I'm down. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
I already hate you. Does that qualify?
Yes, it does.
You hate me too, I think so.
I do. Right now, I do.
So we're good.
I'm good. No, it's by somebody named Terrence Real. How do you say the name?
Real. I don't know. R-E-A-L. Real. He's not fake. He's real. Right?
Yes, right. He's not a phony, I guess.
He's a therapist.
He's a real therapist. And he writes this book about marital hatred that I have not read, but it's something that I've experienced in the past. It's kind of that feeling where, I remember I used to have fights with my ex-wife, and she would say something that would cut me to the quick or something, or the no-win situation and all this stuff. And I'd go in the bathroom. I'd go in the little stall where the toilet was, and I'd turn around. I'd give her the double fingers. Oh, like that.
See, now, aren't you glad that I'm just, I don't have passive aggressive in me. I just come out and stand in the middle of the room and say, F you.
Yes.
You never wonder if I'm behind the door flipping you off.
No, you come out.
I just come out and do it.
You come out and flip me off. Yes. She's a very sweet and tender person. It's very nice. But the idea kind of struck me because Tammy brought this to my attention, but I remember when I was going through my divorce, and one of the first things I did is I went to the high conflict class, which is the class they send you to it's like conflict school,
It's like you don't agree on the clothes and the haircuts and all these little ticky-tacky issues.
So they they try to teach you how to get along. Right. It's largely unsuccessful.
Because you're already well past marital hatred, right?
Because, I guess getting a divorce is kind of like being in a permanent negative state.
Right.
Right. But sometimes we get into those negative states and we don't feel like we can get out of them.
That's true.
It's crazy. And I think that's really what this concept is. And in order to get your marriage off the divorce track and back onto the together track, you got to be able to roll with the punches once in a while.
Mm-hmm. I think the same is true in the co-parenting relationship also.
Well, that's true.
Post-divorce. It's like that same negative dynamic continues to play out, and you've got to do something to shift that, or you're going to stay on this track.
Right. Well, in relationships, They have severe ups and downs, and everybody that I've known that's had a happy relationship has had those times when it's just really bad.
Right.
I even hear somebody like R.C. Sproul, who's a minister, or he's deceased now, but he's a minister that preaches on the radio, and he talks about marriage, and he tells stories about how he and his wife get into periods where they are not having a hard time speaking to each other.
They're butting heads.
They're butting heads, right? And they were married for over 50 years. So it's a wonder he made it that long.
Yeah. Yeah. My grandparents were married. Well, both of my sets of grandparents, but the one in particular were married for, I believe, 63 years. And I'm telling you, she was a spitfire.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of moments, but they survived it,
Right.
and stayed together.
Right. The stories you tell me, there was a lot of negativity towards him coming from her.
Yeah.
And he had an interesting kind of resignation to it.
Yeah, he used humor a lot. My grandfather used humor a lot. I mean, I think people that...
I hate people that do that.
I think people that knew my grandmother, at least from the outside, would always say, both my grandfathers are pastors, and my grandmothers obviously are both pastors' wives. And so a lot of people, my dad's mother, particularly my paternal grandparents, they would talk about how my grandmother was just like the sweetest little person, and everybody that knew her and just thought she was just the most little sweet demure thing. And that's not how I experienced my grandmother at all. Like, my grandmother was, you towed the line. She was a disciplinarian. We were little. You touch her table that's polished, she'd smack your hand. I mean, 2, 3.
Yeah.
She'd be smacking your hands. There were certain rules in her house, and you obeyed them, and all that kind of thing. And I think that she was a lot that way with my grandfather. She had a certain structure within which everything functioned, and he needed to fit into that structure, much like me and you. Oddly enough, it's kind of funny because I feel like our relationship is somewhat reflective of theirs, because you're sort of the one like steering the ship, but then like I'm the one running around making sure everything else on the ship is working, right?
Yes.
And so that's how they were.
I'm the visionary.
Yes, my grandfather was the visionary, and she's the one that like made stuff happen, and so she would get really frustrated with him sometimes, and she would just, and I can just remember her face and her standing in the kitchen and just telling him, "You are killing me." He would say, Arnold. His name was Arnold. Arnold, you're killing me, she'd say.
And she'd call him Chicken George.
They call him Chicken George. And he, he would make some joke, or he would laugh, and he would start laughing, and then she would start laughing, and she'd just shake her head, and they'd go on with it. And so that's one of the things that you were talking about in this article, is he was talking about the ratio of positive to negative.
Right. And he says that it's got to be 5 positives for 1 negative.
We're in trouble, I think today.
Yeah. Today's a negative.
Today's been a rough
This
day.
This is our third take on this.
Yeah, they have the little clapper things. They say, take
Cut.
2, cut. Yeah, this is take 3. So
Yeah.
you have to be in sync to do
because
this.
she started hating me. She did. And she threw the microphone across the room.
I did not do that. That's a lie. And this is just normal marital hatred. It's nothing
This
to
is
worry
the
about.
normal marital
Yeah.
hatred. I felt some of it.
You don't
too.
want to see the other kind.
Yes, that's right. So here's the first bullet point on this article is it's okay to hate your partner. That's kind of a weird statement.
That is.
If you hate your partner, how can you have a partnership with them?
Well, I mean, to me, I think you have to kind of put everything in context. And I think that what I would assume he's trying to say, and maybe I have a different opinion, but what I think he's trying to say is like having those feelings of hatred bubble up toward your spouse is somewhat normal. Sometimes the conflict gets so extreme that you have those moments. I think if you're walking around for hours and days at a time hating the other person, you're headed towards a problem. But I think all of us have moments, just like how maybe that's not a good example. I'd say just how you said you used to be in the bathroom from your ex-wife flip off, but you are divorced now, so maybe that wasn't.
Maybe it didn't work out so well.
Maybe that wasn't normal marital hatred. Maybe that was extreme marital hatred.
Yes.
But, I think anytime relationships are hard, right? And living together is hard. And so anytime that you're in those types of intimate relationships, they're going to have points where it's difficult. And so to me, saying it's normal is kind of a way of saying, look, it's not that the grass is greener on the other side. That's because if I switch you out for the next,
then there'd be something about him that you
that's
hate.
right. I was trying to decide what I want to call the next person, the next handsome lawyer, or the next
the next
jerk
rich
that comes
guy,
along, whatever it is. But the next one that comes along, it's not going to be that the grass is any greener. And I think that is an illusion that my ex-husband fell under, because we got to the point where we were having so much conflict because, I was trying, I'm not saying I was a perfect person, but I think that I did a lot of things for him in the marriage. I didn't feel like he did as much for me. And so I hit a point of resentment that was kind of a point of no return.
Right.
I really had a hard time being soft at that point. And so then his thing was like, well, why should I just live with somebody that's, a jerk all the time, the B word or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It'd be better if I was with somebody else. Well, it's not that it'd be better if he was with somebody else. It'd be better if he could learn to change his behavior patterns and meet some of my needs.
Stop pissing you off.
Right. That would fix everything. And sometimes we think switching the person out might help for a while until that person also starts to get tired of whatever that issue that you have in the relationship is. So I think for me and you, one of the things that this marriage has been different is because for the most part, I think we're both willing to try to look at ourselves and own our part.
Yes. Well, here's an interesting, it says stop idealizing relationships.
Right.
And I think that's a very wise point as it deals with when we divorce, because this marital hatred thing doesn't stop.
No.
In fact, it intensifies.
Right.
And the reason I think that's true is because you've heard it said that love and hate are not really opposites.
Right.
The opposite of love is indifference.
Right.
And the opposite of hate is indifference.
Right.
Either way, you care. I mean, if you hate somebody, then you care if they get injured because you want them to fall into a sewer.
Right.
To an open manhole cover.
Right. Negative or positive, you care.
You care.
You're either wishing for it or hoping it doesn't happen.
Right. So you have people in divorce court who have stopped loving each other.
Right.
But they haven't stopped caring.
Right.
And that's what it is, why it's really hard to turn down the temperature.
Right. So. Right. And, I think that what happens is people also get into denial about, because they'll make comments like, oh, I don't care what the other person does. Right. I've
hear that all the time.
Yeah, I've let go of that. I don't really care. And
somebody
it's
should tell your face.
Yeah, it's like, well, you do care because you're, like you said, you're having these reactions either in the email or the communication or whatever. And so really the whole key even to co-parenting post-divorce is, whether you're trying to save your marriage, regardless of what stage you're at, trying to save your marriage, trying to survive the divorce, trying to co-parent afterwards, the whole thing is about starting to deal with those feelings of hatred towards the other person.
Well, in some ways, you got to stop caring.
Right.
One of the things I did when I divorced was I put up a barrier.
Right.
And I don't think she was able to see inside that barrier.
Right.
And I wasn't able to see her world either.
Right.
And one of the weird things that happened was I started thinking that she had it all together.
Right.
And I couldn't see that she didn't have it all together. But, in a way, that the barrier helped me to have more of a charitable view of her.
Right. And in the very beginning, I think you need those boundaries. You have a lot of people who think, oh, we'll be fine. We're good friends. We can co-parent. We could do whatever. We'll be fine. Kumbaya, whatever. And no, that's not usually how it works for most people. that continued togetherness continues to breed either, the love or the hatred or whatever state you're in, and mostly the hatred, I think.
Yeah.
And it will continue to cause that to rear its ugly head. I mean, we often talk about how just the sound of the other person's voice, the sight of them, the smell of them, like anything will trigger you. And so that's why we say the first 2 to 3 years at least, you need that boundary. And then hopefully what that boundary does is that creates a safe space for you to heal from the relationship. So if you create that boundary and you give yourself that healing time, then fast forward 15 years now, we can sit down with your ex-wife and have Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving or do whatever. It's not a problem.
Right. And I think that when you're experiencing that intense displeasure, what he refers to as marital hatred,
right?
It's really important to learn how to sheath your dagger.
Right.
And I don't think that divorcing people are able to do that, because if they did, they'd probably be together still.
Right.
But it's kind of like when you're in an intimate relationship with somebody, you learn that person so well that you know what the vulnerable points are, and you know where to push to really get a rise out of them. And those are the no-go zones.
Well, you know how to go for the jugular.
Yes.
And that is something that was a recurrent issue in my previous marriage. My ex-husband always went for the jugular.
Right. It's kind of an escalation of conflict, and he starts at blast off.
Right.
There's not usually the marital conflict starts out with some small slight and steamrolls into a huge battle.
Right.
But some people go from zero to blast. It's kind of like on Seinfeld, the Estelle and Frank Costanza.
I love Estelle.
And they start off with, like, she'll say something in a very offhanded way, and he'll just right away come back with anger.
Yeah.
Like, without going through an intermediate stage.
Yeah, like one of my favorite scenes is where she says, where it's the one where Frank set up the garage for George and the other guy to sell computers for him or what? Lloyd Braun, that's who it is, because he lost his job in the mayor's office, right? Because of Elaine. Anyway, too much background. Anyway, you hear Estelle holler down and say, first Frank says, whoever sells the most blah, blah, blah gets a brand new water pick. And she's like, I already told you, you're not giving away my water pick. And then he says something else to the guys and says, oh, don't worry, blah, blah. Whoever sells the most is going to get the water pick or whatever. And then you hear her really scream from the other room, you're not giving away my water pick. She like.
Yeah. And it's just, that's a wonderful illustration of the kind of, and that kind of marriage can't really work.
Yeah. It's only because it's in sitcom land that they haven't killed each other.
Yeah. So you really, to make your divorce work, you have to sheath your dagger a little bit.
Right.
I mean, you really can't be going for the jugular. And that's why we say, when you're communicating with them, it's really important not to go there emotionally.
Right.
It's tempting to do that because you were connected with that person for so long, but it opens the door to conflict.
Well, and this is the very concept of why people struggle so much to me. It's like, okay, we have this couple where the marital hatred has gone beyond, the norm, right? And now in the courts, we're expecting them to suddenly be able to sheath their dagger, as you said, and get along. But wait, these people couldn't do that enough to save their marriage.
Yeah.
How in the world do we expect them to do it?
Yeah, it's
in order to co-parent.
And that's the court saying, can't you just get along?
Can't you be an adult?
Can't the two of you get along?
Up, Yeah, and it's really hard. And
no, we can't.
This is why I think that the coaching becomes so critical, is because, again, we're back to, this is about your behavior. The legal process is all well and good, but what the legal process is expecting of you is what they term adult behavior.
Right.
Which means not sinking to that other person's level.
Right. I love this concept right here. He says, your relationship is an ecosystem. And it's a very good analogy because ecosystems have different parts that function in different ways.
Right.
And really, even after your divorce, your family and the way that your family and your ex's family interact form an ecosystem that's kind of joined together by the children.
Right. Right. It's like you have all these different components now of the ecosystem because we have our house, we have your ex-wife's house, we have my ex-husband's house, and Thomas's ex-wife had 2 children with her second husband, who she's now divorced from. So by extension, but they were married like 12 or 13 years or something. So he has a very significant relationship with Thomas's boys, and so we the link just continues on and on and on, and creates this very large ecosystem where what happens in one household or with one set of children or whatever can have a dramatic impact on the rest.
But here's what happens in an ecosystem. You say something or do something, and that has an impact that kind of ripples through it. And everybody reacts to that in kind of a pre-programmed way. You like to say sometimes, well, don't be a martyr, because sometimes that's my part of the dance, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. And, and I say to you, don't be a bully, because sometimes that's your part of the dance.
Sometimes.
And what people tend to do after they separate and they're in the courts is that person's a horrible person, like black and white thinking, like there's nothing redeeming about them. And what I've always found helpful to understand is that you have a part.
Right.
And you have to understand that part and that role, or you won't be able to function in that ecosystem.
Right. And once you start to understand that part and that role, then you can start to shift things to where you're not living in this constant state of negative soup, just constantly swimming in negative soup, as I sometimes say, because let's face it. I mean, conflict in your co-parenting relationship, the conflict during the divorce is horrible, but if you have kids together and you have to continue, that can just be misery for a very long time. Yeah. That affects your day-to-day life, like forever, essentially. Right. I mean, people say, oh, well, till the kids are 18. No, I'm telling you, my kids are 31 and 27, and it has not just disappeared. Yeah. It's less frequent. I'll give you that. Right. But it has not disappeared. And so that's, that's a big part of being able to shift the dynamic and shift how you're contributing to the situation is by starting to understand what your role in it is.
Right. And then you can see the other person a little bit more charitably. You can see that, with these parental alienation cases, these kids need their dad. They need their dad but they don't just need a dad. They need a dad that they respect.
Right.
They need a dad that has a certain authority and a certain gravitas, a certain gravity to him, it's not just a buffoon.
Well, and to me, a lot of times the problem that especially young children, when we see a divorce, is when children are young, I think a lot of that softness and nurturing and whatever comes from mom. And then as teenagers, a lot of the sort of, discipline and authoritarian part comes from dad. But when you divorce, in a certain way, each parent has to learn to pick up both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a young child and you're
hire a replacement.
Something. Yes. This is what you chose to do, right? But if you have a young child and you divorce and you're dad and you're, I'm dad, I'm the protector and I'm the breadwinner and I'm all these things, but I don't know how to sit down and brush my little girl's hair or play princess with her if that's what she enjoys or whatever.
Love playing princess.
Then you gotta figure that out, because if you don't, you're gonna have a harder time bonding with that child. Bonding with children is all about figuring what they're interested in.
That's true.
That's what it's all about. My grandchildren, it's like they're all different and they all have different interests. And so, you got to meet little children where they're at, because they're not there to serve you. They don't care, right? You have to create that bond with them as the adult.
Yeah.
And I think that if your mom and that split happens, and again, I mean, this is a little bit, gender type issues, and I'm not saying it's 100% true in every case, but I think for mom, the challenge is controlling the teenagers when they're older.
Yeah.
I particularly found that challenging with having boys and sort of being this single mom with boys and trying to be able to be tough enough and, strong enough to sort of hold my ground with them.
Right. And we're about to find out about the girls, because we have girl grands.
Yeah, we have grandkids. Yeah.
And so now we're going to learn about girls. We know everything about boys.
Yes. Yeah. So now we're learning about princesses and horses and all the although my one granddaughter she's always a tiger. Like she's a little bit more rough and tumble, and she's like the tiger, she calls herself.
Right. And it's funny when I play with the girls, they're girly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like I go in and Reagan says, "Pappy, I want you to sit over there." No, not there. Sit there. And then she brings Poppy. And she brings me the toys one by one, and we have a little conversation with them.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's totally different from how I used to play with my kids. We used to get dirty when we played.
Right.
We used to play in mud. We had this pile of dirt that we played in.
Right.
And so it's a little different. But to me, what a girl learns from what the grandkids are learning from me in some ways is, what do I want in a mate?
Right.
And they love on me.
Right.
And, I feel like the relationship has some of that it has some of that male-female relationship.
Right.
Quality to it.
Right. It's like the secondary dad type relationship. It like reinforces that dad type interaction with a daughter.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you're the granddad, but I'm just.
It's
saying
almost it has some of the qualities of a husband and wife. There's a certain way that I interact with them that, in a way, teaches them how a man is supposed to react to a woman.
Right. Right.
So that when they grow up,
they don't go out and marry some jerk. Unless you're a jerk to them.
Yeah, unless I'm a jerk to them.
Their dad's not, though, so that's good.
No, but and I try to. The thing with the girls is you got to listen to them.
Yeah, we want to be listened to. That's true.
Oh God!
You'd think you'd have learned that by now. You need to learn that with me too.
Right. So if you have girls, the conversation, and that's hard for me,
Yeah.
I mean, I like to splash in the pool.
Yeah. You're a much more physical guy than a conversationalist. Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. You got to kind of take on tea parties.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I talk about when my one son was about 17, I can remember standing in his room and him getting like nose to nose with me and me not being sure if he was going to punch me or not. He was so angry, and his anger was out of control. Yeah. But I couldn't flinch. I had to stand there and stand my ground. And if I hadn't, I would have lost all control. Yeah. So I think it's important, and every child's different. Every child has different interests. Some boys are softer, some girls are more tomboyish, some like whatever your kid is, you have to learn how, as their parent, to sort of meet them where they're at and be interested in what they're interested in. And that's not the same thing as not parenting or not, disciplining or whatever. It just means, understanding that so that you can bond with them, because really that's what the court wants to see you do, is creating this bond with your kids, not standing around claiming that the other parent is.
It's not all fun and games either.
The problem or whatever.
There have been periods of time where I was kind of at odds with. Yeah, and you don't, I mean, as a parent, you're almost desperate to not have that.
Your children, you mean? You're at odds with your children, yeah. Parenting's hard.
Especially now.
Right.
With the boys.
Right.
It's hard sometimes to, I feel rejected.
Yeah.
Sometimes at the hand, they want to be with their friends. They don't want to be with me anymore.
Right.
And I can't help it. It makes me sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're trying to teach the kids too. I think this is important to teach them that, relationships are hard and it's not going to be rosy all the time. And, I don't think we have to discuss specific concepts like marital hatred, but I think it is important to understand that relationships are hard. They don't always go the way that you want them to, but in the end, if you don't go for the jugular and you manage your own emotions and all those things, then you're going to have a better chance of, one, hopefully not going through a divorce.
And if you have a sense of humor.
Sense of humor helps. But number two, if you are going through a divorce, then learning how to start recognizing those patterns and how to shift them so you don't have this misery in your post-divorce co-parenting relationship.
Right. Human relationships are complex.
Yeah.
Ever since the fall, as I like to say, they're complex, and you can't just kind of pigeonhole them into, well, this person's just a jerk.
Right.
Even your ex-husband, if you think really hard.
My ex-husband really is a jerk, though.
Well, but.
I'm just kidding. It was a joke.
I know. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to knock you off of that.
I know.
I honestly think that he has some difficulties that, I don't know, they might come from his childhood. I don't want to get too psychoanalytical or whatever, but he's kind of a wounded person.
Right.
And you know what? So's my ex-wife.
Yeah. And, that's the thing is that a lot of times when people do have those kinds of wounds, they use this tough exterior to protect themselves.
Right.
They have a hard time being vulnerable. I think that's a quality that both my ex-husband and your ex-wife have, is they have a hard time being vulnerable with other people.
They won't show what they're really feeling.
Right. And then
they become inscrutable.
And then the consequence of that is it's hard to bond with another person because you obviously don't have enough level of trust to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Me and Tammy, we're fairly WYSIWYG. Both of us are. I wear my heart on my sleeve.
A little bit.
And she wears her anger on her sleeve.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. So.
I love you, Tammy.
Yeah, don't say that. That's not nice for divorcing people to hear. No.
Okay, no, I don't.
He hates me.
I hate
your guts. He has a lot of marital hatred for me.
I hate your guts. All right.
All right. So if you're listening to us on YouTube, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you are listening to the podcast, please rate and review us and also hit subscribe so you get notified as new episodes come out. And we will talk to you soon.
See you then.
Thank you for listening to the Divorce University online podcast with your hosts, Thomas and Tammy Ferreira. For more information, visit www.divorceuniversityonline.com.